Hi, everyone. I'm attorney Donna DiMaggio Berger, and this is Take It to the Board, where we speak condo and HOA. Today's guest brings an important perspective to our podcast, that of Developers Council. With construction booming in many parts of the U.S., and particularly in Florida, where we are situated, our conversation is an important one. My partner, Jennifer Drake, has been a key player in shaping Becker's real estate department and has worked extensively with developers over the years. Jennifer was recognized as the best lawyer in America for real estate law in their 2023, 2024, and 2025 editions. The Greater Fort Lauderdale Alliance Foundation named Jennifer as a 2021 Leadership Award recipient for her outstanding community leadership. Jennifer has also been named to the Martindale-Hubbell Bar Register of Preeminent Women Lawyers in Legal Ability and Ethical Standards, as well as being AV rated by Martindale-Hubbell. She's currently the vice chair of the Greater Fort Lauderdale Alliance and is the incoming chair for next year. Jennifer is also a former president of Leadership Broward. Jennifer also serves on the board of directors of the Business for the Arts Broward and is the chair of the Public Arts Committee, which is spearheading the Lead with Love Art Murals project in collaboration with the Community Foundation. They will have 9 love murals painted by New York artist Say Adams and placed in various cities throughout Broward County. Additionally, their committee is looking at potentially being able to have 11 to 14 outdoor mural projects in the pipeline for 2025. They're working hard to assist local artists and also bring art to the citizens of Broward County. Well, since I am a citizen of Broward County, I am looking forward to seeing all that. In this episode, we'll explore how Jennifer helps developers navigate Florida's unique real estate challenges, and we'll also dive into trends that are shaping today's condominium and HOA market. Make sure you listen to the entire episode because at the end, we're going to talk a little bit about bourbon. So whether you're here for the real estate insights or the bourbon banter, this episode promises a smooth finish. So Jennifer, welcome to Take It to the Board.
Thank you.
We'll have a smooth finish. We always do. So just at the outset, Jen, could you walk us through your role as developer counsel in the early stages of a new project?
Sure. So when a developer wants to develop a condominium project, an HOA project, plan community development, that type of thing, I usually get an email, I usually get a call, in which case I then set up a meeting because what I need to know is what are they planning? What type of projects is it going to be? Is it going to be a mix of commercial and residential or only residential? Is it condo? Is it townhomes? Is it single family homes? What's their vision? And then I set up a meeting with them because it's very important to know where they want to go, what they want to achieve, and how they want to achieve it, because that determines what documents I use. If it's going to be a large project with more than one condominium building, I have a master association. Sometimes if it's a large HOA with many, many homes, we have sub associations. We try to stay, to be very honest, if it's smaller developments, we try to stay away from the Condo Act if we can get it into a townhome HOA. A lot of problems with that is that a townhome has to be subdivided. So if your town or municipality will not let you subdivide that property, then we have to use condo because condominiums are a subdivision of property without having to plat. I know that's getting technical, but that's very important because
it's getting real technical real quick. And that just shows how complicated it is. How quickly do you talk about budget, Jen, when you get that first call or email? And I'm not just talking about the legal budget of what they're going to pay you to help them realize the development. Overall, how quickly do you get into a budget conversation?
From an association point of view, that is totally on the developer. My initial conversations on budget is literally legal, depending on what they're going to do, how they're going to do it. I send out a big proposal with a lot of information. And what's fun about my practice is I've run the gamut from strictly commercial. I've got condominiums that are huge, expensive condominiums just for fancy cars. I've got plenty of residential. I've got combined residential commercial. So you name it. I also do vertical subdivisions, just so you know. So but the budget, because we're not accountants, I give them the structure. I tell them legally what's required in the budget, because under 718, you have to have set line items, even if they don't apply. And that's one of the hardest things to get developers to do right off the bat. But it is totally up to them. I will tell you, a developer, no matter whether it's high end or lower end, their assessment and their budget are extremely important to them for sales. So and I know I'm going to throw in a concept we'll probably talk about later, with insurance and now these assessments, these service requirements, the reserves, it's getting very, very expensive to live in a condominium in the state.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt. And that's been kind of a running theme on the podcast. So we need to talk about budgets and how there's a perception that the developer budgets are somehow kept artificially low because they're looking to sell. And then post turnover, the first thing that happens is every line item just about increases. Is that reality? Is it perception?
Well, not when I'm representing them.
Okay.
Reality is, here's the legal advice I give every one of my developers. I've done it from the beginning and I do it now. I tell them it is very important that you develop a realistic budget, because if you don't, you can be sued. Bottom line. So I think it's very important that when I represent a developer, to make sure that I protect the developers, but also that the developers understand the legality and all the issues going on in 718. And the problem with budgets in the last, I would say, 15 years or so, Donna, and the reason it goes from one extreme sometimes to another is insurance cost. So if we have a string of years where there's a lot of hurricanes and we've got a high rise, it's going to take at least 3 years to build. Their original budget, I tell them, has to be realistic. If they have a huge jump in insurance and it happens the year that they start closings, then you're going to see a high increase. But if they're guaranteeing that budget, which I've not had a developer of a high rise that doesn't guarantee it, it stays at that lower level. But we go ahead and we have to create our annual budget that shows what the costs are.
You know, I'm wondering, as I'm listening to you walk through your process, and as you said, guiding your developer clients to come out of the gate with a realistic budget. I have, over the last 2 years, come across a lot of, I would call them boutique developers, smaller developers. Some of them are doing these vanity projects with all the bells and whistles. They are not developers that are going to continue developing in the state of Florida. Again, it may be a one-off or two-off vanity project. They are using, almost without exception, counsel that really are not familiar with 718, not familiar with 720. And so sometimes we see those budgets are way off. Also, it makes transition, which for our listeners is the process whereby the owners eventually take control of the association from the developer. It's night and day. Why do you think that's happening?
Because of what happened in Florida in 2008. In 2008, you know, until then, which was the Great Recession, in case people don't remember, it was when they didn't just taper off. I had 60 developers and we hit a wall because Fannie Mae said, we're not going to issue any mortgages for condo units in Florida. Then that went with all, whether it was Fannie Mae loans or larger loans. And what I'm going to call the real experienced developers that you saw that did the same projects over and over, and we didn't have a housing shortage then, and everything wasn't only high rise. You know, those were the good old days. We have a whole different group of people coming in, and during that time, because it was so hard to get money, it was so hard to even build a condo, you have a lot of what I'm going to call foreign developers that came up from Latin America that developed things totally different. But we also have a ton of New York developers. And I want to be very careful here because I just know how I practice law. And I don't want to get in on how other people do. But I think what happens is they come in and they use these firms that they've used for their equity businesses, their commercial, contracts, their corporate contracts. And as you know, lawyers, when you're asked if you can do something, you say, sure, I can do that. Because Donna, think about it. You can get a whole filing from the division. You can go online and get these. It's easy to get the documentation.
Kind of mimic what somebody else has built.
Yes. But here's the fun, and one of the benefits that I have with being a Becker attorney for years and years, when I first came to Becker, I was a developer attorney. Becker was known for suing developers. And I remember a lot of my colleagues were going, oh, how would you do that? Why would you go there? I said, I'm going to use it to my benefit. And I used it, and I still use it to my benefit because I know 718 really, really well. I also know what happens from an association point of view, and I've been able to use my association attorney practice group as a, sounding board. How would you attack, well, especially in the litigation, how would you attack this contract? What would you do with this provision? And because my documents have evolved, and I know some people think there's a lot of legalese in it, but my documents, as have most documents, people like Greenberg, attorneys that really know this, our documents have evolved because of the lawsuits that have occurred, the arbitration cases that have come down. We've learned from what happens, and
legislative changes over the last couple decades, which have been significant.
Yeah, lately they've been huge in the townhome area too. They're starting to regulate townhomes extensively. But we've learned, but that's also made our condo docs get really big. So, but I mean, anywhere from mold issues, because that's South Florida, to noise, to if I'm going to have a restaurant in my condo project, I got to make sure that I put a disclaimer about smells. So anyway, that's that story.
We're talking about inexperienced counsel, maybe not. I mean, they could be very experienced, as you said. It could be your private equity attorney, law firm or attorney. What about inexperienced developers? So I'm wondering again how educated or sophisticated the consumer is when they see one of these buildings and it's beautiful and bells and whistles, but it's a brand new developer to the market, and it's probably, as again, maybe a one-off project. Should those potential purchasers be concerned about who the developer is?
I think so. I mean, I truly think so. So I represented Ugo Colombo for years and years. On his very first project, Bristol Tower. And that's when he was doing a lot of different projects. And one of the classic things about that company as a developer is they knew they were going to do additional projects on Brickell, additional projects in South Florida. And it was very important to him as the owner of the company, and it ran through the company, that we want to do a product that our buyers want to go somewhere else and buy again. They were always treated, and I lawyered from the position that they wanted to do what was, we protected them, but do what was best for their end buyers. And it was a formula that worked because people knew that if they got a unit in that building, it was very well built. What happened after the crash of 2008, and then we went through the whole Great Recession, and then condos started coming back, and I was talking about New York. So all these, it got to be a race of what fancy, really loved architect that's built some really expensive unit in our development in New York, could they get to come down here and design their project? Because that's what the selling point was. That's what everybody flocked to. I had clients in New York that would have me review the documents because they knew I was a developer attorney, because they could get a unit with ABC Architect for half the price of what they were paying in New York, even though they still had the New York unit. So what you've seen with that type of development is where not normal condo developers saw a real opening and came down here and really.
And they took it. Yeah. So let's get back to the project. You get a call, you're working on you're working on the documents. What are the potential landmines that can derail a new construction project?
Lack of experience of the developer. Not as much now. There used to be more of a lending issue. The money was tighter. With interest rates having come down some for a while, the high interest rates, the high cost of construction is still difficult to get around. Interest rates have come down now. If you're a really good developer, you can get a decent loan. And all of the lenders learned to use or have the developer use their deposits prior to really the loan kicking in. But you can still have what I'm going to call, by the time they see me, they've already gone through all their land use issues. They've gone through any variances they need to do. Those pitfalls have already been taken care of. So now ours are more if they run into a permitting issue, as they go through. But it's gotten, in the last few years, we don't have that many problems again on probably actually getting the project built. It's getting it to the point where construction starts. Right. Once construction starts, it's usually pretty good sailing. The other thing is the getting the contracts. As these laws are starting to change, I foresee that we're going to have fewer and fewer non-ultra rich people being able to afford living in condominiums in Florida.
Yeah, I mean, that is again kind of a theme that's run throughout the last couple seasons on the podcast. Decades ago, 50s, 60s, this was affordable to live in a coastal condominium. They saw it as turnkey. They didn't, they came down their little slice of paradise that they could afford. Not really the case now. I did want to ask you about hiccups and hiccups when it comes to the prospectus and how closely does the state oversee what you submit?
Oh, the state oversees it. I'm going to be very careful here. There used to be a high level of expertise at the state. A gentleman by the name of Rick Crow was wonderful. He understood the statute really well. He understood the unit buyer side and the developer side. And he's the kind of examiner that you could call up and explain some of the things you were doing and how the statute really does apply. I think the way it's gotten now with COVID and just the whole change of administrations, the division has a checklist of items they've got, and they've provided it now to all of us as attorneys that do this work, and they have listed what sections of the statute. So the people that now review our documents, they review everything with a fine-tooth comb, but it's very rote. And I have found in quite a few occasions that the examiner does not necessarily understand. If it doesn't read just like the statute, I'm trying.
Well, that's why I was asking you, because you have indicated that over the years your documents have evolved as they need to when you're taking into account the overall statutory framework, the case law framework, and we all know, because we see it on the legislative end when it goes, when a bill proposal goes into Senate drafting and it comes out and it's like it was drafted in a vacuum almost. It's the same type of thing. So that's why I kind of asked you.
Let me tell you why it's the same kind of thing. Back in the day of people like Rick Crow, we used to be able to take, I'm going to back up here for everybody that isn't familiar with the making of the sausage and legislation and all of that. Statutes are not always very well written, and they're not always clear, especially not only for lawyers, but they're not always clear for the public, right? The people buying. So we used to be able to take the statute and make what I'm going to call plain English paragraphs that meant the same thing. Because of the way our documents are reviewed today by the division, if it doesn't read like the statute, we get a deficiency.
That is such an important point, because, you're at the front end of it. I'm at I wouldn't say the very back end, because the very back end is termination, but I'm right at the beginning, the next, turn in the path, which is transition. And then we start digging into the documents and the policies and the protocols. And I always get this question, why are these documents so filled with legalese? And you just explained it, because it has to track the statute. And the statute, as we know, look, we've got people listening all over, Jennifer, not just in Florida, but Florida's Condominium Act is, in my opinion, the most bloated, incomprehensible shared ownership statute in the country. And that's what we're dealing with.
It is. And if you went back and looked at a set of documents I did 20 years ago, 25 years ago, compared to what it is today, you would totally go, oh, I get what she's saying. So, as well as I do, some of that language is extremely hard to interpret. I mean, it just is. But that's what we have to put in, because we have to get our documents approved. And that's what we do. It's
like the Community Association Lawyers Relief Act, because on the one hand, they don't necessarily like all that much, but it virtually guarantees that our phones are going to ring, our emails are going to, come to our inboxes, because as you said, it is not a model of clarity. Let's just say that. I did want to talk to you about developers, and this is not necessarily in your area because you're creating the documents, but how important is it for developers, and how often do they have to seek out the cooperation of neighboring property owners? Because they're developing now in areas right next door. It's very dense. What do you think?
It used to be an issue back in the day. People, when South Florida wasn't so full of high rises, from the time we started the crane count, it never really went down. I don't know if you're listening public understands or remembers the crane count, but it still goes on. There were so many condominiums being developed in South Florida. There was a whole organization that would count the cranes, and it used to only be Miami-Dade, and then it moved up to Broward, and now it's up in Palm Beach County too. So I think that we as a society have become used to high rises. I mean, I think some of them, you have to wonder what the municipalities, and I know I'm representing developers, but are thinking. I know here in Broward, we've got some high rises that are so close that the biggest complaints we get are the debris of the construction of the building that is literally falling on existing condominiums balconies. I mean, that's our big neighboring issue. And to be honest, once you've got that right to build, it's not like they're stopping your construction.
So, Jennifer, you said a while ago, you mentioned car condominiums. I got to know what that is. I have to know what that is, a condominium exclusively for cars. And also want to know what other trends you're seeing out there right now.
So I have a developer who has a great concept, and he's got 2 projects in Palm Beach, and he is going to expand it. And it's Hangar Alpha, Hangar Bravo. And what they literally do, you know how you would do a condo hotel where the skin of the building is shared facilities and the air is the condo association. We've built it that way so that the looks are the same. The outside of the building is maintained. And it's for, there are a lot of car clubs and car enthusiasts down here, especially now that we have the F1 race in Miami. And so it is literally condominiums, and they're really nice. And the project, there's a club and a clubhouse, and all these car enthusiasts, they buy their units, they can work on the cars there. They have, some of them have lifts and have 3 or 4 cars, and they do a loft and have, a sofa and stereo and all of that. They get together, but you can't live there. It's
say, what if you can't? Do you have prohibitions against people sleeping overnight, or just for a consecutive number of nights, something like that?
Yeah, and that's usually because of the permitting and ordinances.
What are board meetings like? Do they drive their cars?
Everybody's happy, because you don't live there. It's their cars. They have a good time. It's a great concept.
That's so interesting. Oh, so what else? What other construction trends? Specifically, I read about micro units. Have you done any projects with these teeny tiny units?
Those, I had several developers that looked into that and decided against it.
Mhm.
There are several that are being developed. I think a lot of the developers that were going to do that as condos switched to making them apartments. But now, because of the cost, see, we have it's not almost, it's not as high as New York, but our living costs are still, like Broward County was number one for the last few years, just the whole cost of living. Micro units are now making a comeback, but they're in day right now because that's kind of that the trends start down there. It's interesting, totally different counties. The other thing that's surprising that I'm finding is that what I'm going to call the non-national, kind of the local developers, the family-owned developers, those types of things, they're starting to look at units not going over 3 stories. Now, that doesn't avoid SERS, but what it does is you don't have the construction cost, you don't have all the insurance liability, you don't have the assessment reserves that you're going to need the maintenance to reserve for the building. And it's going to be a push-pull because we're running out of land here. So I'm seeing that more on the West Coast. And then
Not to exceed, but you're going to have less density.
you're going to have less. That's the whole point. You'll need more land and less density. The whole
Right, you'll be more spread out. Yeah.
whole reason we've gone high-rise crazy is because land's so expensive and the density you can get. So
Also lose the view unless they're clustered around water, right?
yeah, so the thing about that is the buyer that you're seeking isn't looking so much for the view as reasonable housing. And in Florida, reasonable housing is $8,000-9,000.
Yeah, that's a whole other podcast episode on affordable housing.
I have a passion for that, and I speak all over the country on attainable, and I've done a website for one of my organizations, AIAI, on attainable housing. It's extremely difficult. You can't get, it's hard to get the cost to pencil out and be affordable. But even those are in Florida are running $465,000-500,000.
So not so attainable for most people.
Oh.
Especially when we've got all these fancy restaurants moving down here, fancy, large corporations, and you wonder, where are all the workers going to be living? Even the rentals are super expensive. As you said, I thought I read a year or so ago that the Miami rental market was one of the most expensive in the entire country in terms of what people's percentage of their paycheck goes towards housing.
Broward was number one.
Broward was number one.
Yeah,
Wow.
because of it's a very hospitality economy, so wages would stay low. Even what I'm going to call white collar jobs are lower because of our baseline. And you've got apartments running what they cost in like Jersey City and those places. I mean, it's expensive.
Jen, have you done a lot of mixed use communities?
Oh yeah, that's mostly what I've done. And that's where I've got a huge project right now, Hallandale Oasis Hallandale. It's actually, it's 2 commercial condominiums. It's 1 piece of property, 2 commercial condominiums. It's got a dog park, it's got retail, it's got, shops. And then back in the back, it's 2 high-rise towers of residential, 250 each. So that's a very interesting project. It's kind of like a law school exam because the podium isn't part of the condominium, it's separate. So I had to do a master garage association because they're sharing it and their buildings sit on it, but they're not part of it. It was quite interesting. So
Sounds complicated. And speaking of which, so in a lot of the mixed use communities, again, buyers will look at, the view, their unit. They'll, oh, how cool. I can go to the Whole Foods. I can go to there's a dry cleaner here and everything. And then later they come to us and say the actual operations are very complicated in terms of the board, their sub-association, a master association. I think that some of this is just inherently complicated because you've got such an ambitious development scheme.
Well, no, it's because of 718. So the reason that we divide and do a lot of these vertical subdivisions, in 718, we have a mixed use statute that says commercial space has to pay the same type of assessment percentage wise as unit owners. Well, when you've got 10, 12,000 feet and you're paying the same, it doesn't work for getting tenants in there. Okay. So, and also businesses don't want to be controlled by residential condominium associations, which is what the mixed use makes you do if you don't have equal, they have equal voting. So we used to always have weighted voting for commercial units where they controlled their own destiny, so to speak. Even though there were way more units, when they passed that law, we started playing with okay, we'll make a cube of air for the commercial and they'll make that a separate lot. And then we'll do a condo lot. And a lot of that was with the shared facilities. I've done vertical subdivisions where we had a residential condominium, a whole 2 floors of retail, a hotel, and an office building. And instead, and a garage. And what I ended up doing is I created a declaration of covenants and restrictions and an association, like a master association to govern all those lots. So we had a hotel lot, we had a residential condo lot, so that the residential condo was its own being. And I always, if I'm doing that type of mixed development, it is very complicated from a drafting point of view. But if you separate it that way, it's more governable. And I always make sure the association has their own lobby, that they're lollipop and touch the ground, because right. It's very important for an association to have control of all of that. Because they also don't want to be whiplashed by the commercial part.
100%. And that's why it's so important. And look, I think purchasers need to have their own counsel, even for just a very basic, I'm buying a condo unit in just a 5-story building. But when you're talking about this kind of mixed use development, you've got a hotel component and you've got a restaurant and you've got, you need to dig into those documents. And I don't know many purchasers who are going to be able to do that on their own. So it really would behoove people to hire an attorney, real estate attorney, to help them walk them through their documents while they still have the rescission rights and figure out whether or not this kind of development that they will feel comfortable with it. Because a lot of times we'll hear, well, this isn't fair and we're paying to subsidize this. And there's people walking through our lobby and we've got security concerns and everything you just touched on. And a lot of it's going to boil down to developers counsel and how well they drafted those documents and how much they took into account the long-term operational pain points.
Well, yeah, and again, that my benefit comes from where I am a shareholder, what I've seen and what I care as an attorney and a person in drafting my documents. Okay. I could draft documents that are totally way developer heavy. And actually, if a developer really wanted that, I would try to talk them out of it. But if they're not going to do other developments, to a point, as long as they're doing it legally, they can. But what I have seen is that the early remnants of our shared facilities, hotel condos, they're sexy as can be because you've got a spa and it's 4 seasons and it's, it looks great. But then all of a sudden, and people do not read their documents. Right. It is very clear to me, even people spending $10 and $12 million on a unit do not read their documents. And sometimes they're too cheap to have attorneys do it. So what happens is they've offloaded all these shared facilities that they're paying for that they don't have any control over the budget. So So yeah, it's very important to know who your developer is and read the documents.
Buyer beware. Jen, have environmental factors influenced the way you draft these documents? And let me give you an example. Window maintenance, for example. If I'm looking at a 12-story condominium on the coast in Florida, does it make sense to have the owners maintaining those windows? Like, have the environmental factors influenced your drafting when it comes to maintenance and repair obligations?
So I've done quite a few high-rise condos that are very glass forward.
Heavy? Yeah.
I always have it's the owner's cost, association's responsibility for balconies, and the glass, the glazing, because I may be one of these owners that I care, but my neighbor may not even know what glazing is, which is, for those who don't understand, that's making sure your windows are properly caulked and keep the rain out. But my philosophy in drafting the documents and where I put the maintenance obligations were always with the thought that an association is going to hire a knowledgeable company because they have certain obligations of due diligence and stuff. But instead of having me with a leaking unit and the neighbor next door, because it's going to affect the people down below me, so yes, from that point of view, where you put maintenance obligations are very important. And again, I said something about balcony and balcony railings. That has always been something, especially on the coast, that I've put on the association to maintain, split by unit owners. Again, because number one, an association is going to take care of a problem 9 times out of 10, whereas an individual unit owner you can't count on.
This is really becoming an issue in Florida now in the last few years because of the SIRS, or the Structural Integrity Reserve Study, which says that, the association has to maintain reserves for windows if they are responsible for the maintenance and repair of those windows. So I've had a number of clients come and say, well, we want to amend this to push it back, the window maintenance and repair back onto the owners. And I always push back against that, saying, look, you think you're going to save in terms of not having to reserve for those components? You're going to lose in terms of paying legal fees to chase these owners when they're not maintaining those windows, and also with regard to insurance premiums. But this is the short-term thinking we're seeing right now.
I'm going to tell you another real important point too, to tell your unit owners. Some of the largest damage that I've seen has not been wind damage. It's when we have like the hurricanes where it's very like urban, that's just rain, and the rain's going sideways. I mean, millions and millions of dollars of damage, making condominiums uninhabitable. And as well as I do, that it can take years to settle an insurance claim. So if you have windows that you've maintained as they are required to be maintained, you're going to eliminate a lot of damage and grief.
I could not agree more. We're almost wrapping up here, but I do have to ask you, because look, you have really built a profile in the real estate industry over the last few decades. What tips do you have for younger attorneys who are listening as to how you did it, other than just being a really unbelievable real estate attorney, Jennifer?
Well, thank you. You do have to be good at what you do.
Yes.
You have to have integrity. That's very important. You need to be consistently honorable and know the statute. Give your clients the best advice, but let them make their business decisions. And if they make their business decisions, then you craft your documents to protect them as best you can. Okay? But it's also very, very, very important to be involved in the community. I've been involved, like you said at the beginning, I've been involved in Leadership Broward. I was president. I was on the board for 2 different 6 and 7 year terms. I've been very involved. My very first community involvement was the Fort Lauderdale Seafood Festival. You get to know your community. You get to know the people. I've been very involved in the Fort Lauderdale Alliance, which is, we are the economic development entity for Broward County. we're the first people that companies that want to move here see us. Well, the more you're involved, we're dealing with all the C-level, executives. I'm dealing with the who's who of business people in Broward. You can't just do that. You can't just show up on the scene and become a vice chair or chair of that kind of organization. You have to give back to your community. So, and then the other part of it is I have my young attorneys, they need to get involved in believe it or not, the bar association to get to know the attorneys and also to get to know, again, I'm going to go back to knowing the law very well because that helps you to become a very good attorney, but you need to know both sides because you can't represent the developers really well if you don't know what and care about what the buyers and the unit owners are going to care about, and you have to give a balance. So I guess that's my tip.
Those are your hot takes.
I think.
Hope everyone's listening. So as I promised in the introduction, I want to talk to you about your membership in the Bourbon Women Association of Louisville. So how did that happen, and what is so special about bourbon?
Well, bourbon's actually delicious, but it also has a big place in American history. It's been around. I mean, it's funny because before I think we even became a country, especially like in the Kentucky area, before it was Kentucky and Tennessee, and down the Tennessee River, they used to make like bourbon and it's got corn and it's got rye and it's got barley. And then they would ship it down on the river to New Orleans. That's how Bourbon Street became Bourbon Street, because all the cask of bourbon would end up down on that street in New Orleans from being made up in the South. But I got involved with this group of women because there are a lot of women distillers and what I'm going to call bourbon people that are in the bourbon industry. There's a ton of women. And so this Women's Bourbon Association out of Louisville, that's the heart of bourbon country, okay? And like Peggy No Stevens, that is Jim Beam's, that is his granddaughter. And it's just so cool, the history and the fun. And they teach you all about bourbon. You know the notes, you know how to taste, you know what's good, and then you just have fun. But
will you take me to a bourbon tasting? I'm
you
not.
can come to my house and get.
Okay, you're not far from me, so let's do it. So you've been very gracious with your time. Last question: if you could only take one bourbon with you to a desert island, or let's say a particularly long HOA meeting, what would it be and why?
Oh, that's kind of hard. That's like making me pick one of my favorite children. So, but I will tell you this. If I absolutely had to pick one, I would pick Midwinter's Night Dram because it's absolutely delicious. But if I couldn't get a bottle of that, because it's very hard to get, I love Willet Rye. I love Peerless Rye. I love Michter's Rye. And so you were talking about the Women's Bourbon Association. We have what's called the Peacock Club. And you pay an extra fee to be a member of the Peacock Club. And they go around, and these ladies that have been in like Peggy and Susan Reiter and these people that have been in the bourbon industry for years, they go around to different distilleries and select barrels. And they selected this Four Roses barrel that is almost as good as with Midwinter's Night Dram. So probably grab that. I mean, I got several. I might sneak more than one.
Well, there you have it. And depending on who listens to this episode, I think maybe you'll be set next Christmas. So Jennifer, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to follow and rate us on your favorite podcast platform or visit takeittotheboard.com for more ways to connect.